Welcome. Tonight, we'll be drifting back to the deep and distant echoes of the medieval world. But rather than kings and crusades, rather than glory and gold, we'll slip quietly into the shadows, into cloistered stone halls beneath the chill of candlelight, and into a life few would choose today, the life of a medieval monk. You may have imagined this life as one of quiet contemplation, of solemn rituals and sacred devotion. And in many ways that's true, but there was also cold. There was silence, more silence than you may expect. There was repetition, there was obedience, there was sacrifice. Over the next 2 hours, we'll guide you through this strange and fascinating world and unrushed. First, we'll step inside the sandals of a novice monk, experiencing his daily routine with all its discomfort and rhythm. Then we'll follow the curious and luminous life of Hildegard von Bingen, a woman who defied the limitations of her time from within the walls of a convent. From there, we explore the mysterious world of monastic libraries, many of which have left behind only ash and riddles. And finally, we'll rise from the stone floor to the carved oak of bishops' feasting halls, exploring how the church's elite lived in a very different kind of comfort. So, settle in. Let your thoughts wander slowly through time, and let the distant rhythm of chants and bells guide you into stillness. We begin now with the first segment. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't want to be a medieval monk. Imagine this. You rise in darkness. There are no clocks, no soft alarms, just the toll of a heavy bell echoing through cold, empty corridors. The air is sharp against your skin. The fire, long since died, leaves only the chill of stone. You wrap yourself in your rough woolen robe. It scratches faintly against your skin, never quite warm, never quite soft. The fabric smells faintly of earth, smoke, and time. Your feet, wrapped in thin leather, or perhaps nothing at all, press against the icy floor. It is Matins, the first of many prayers. The community gathers in the choir, standing in rows like shadows in candlelight. There are no seats. You stand or kneel, and you chant. Low, slow, rhythmic syllables. In Latin, you don't fully understand yet, weaving together into sacred repetition. This will happen again in a few hours' lauds, then prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and finally, compline. The bells divide your day, not the sun. There is no freedom of time, only the structure of devotion. And in between prayers, you work. Might be assigned to the fields turning earth with aching muscles and simple tools. Or you might work in the kitchen, cutting salted fish, turning thick pots of porridge, or hauling water from a distant well. You do not cook for taste, but for nourishment and, not even always enough of that. Meals are taken in silence. You sit on a bench, head bowed, while a brother reads aloud from scripture or a sermon. You eat what you're given, coarse bread, watery broth, sometimes a scrap of cheese. On feast days, you might have meat, but most days you do not. Hunger is a part of holiness. There is no conversation. The vow of silence, though not absolute, presses down upon the monastery like fog. When speaking is allowed, it is measured and spare. Often, you communicate through simple hand signs, an entire language of gestures developed to keep mouths closed. Your bed is a simple wooden frame, or perhaps straw on the floor. A thin blanket. A shared dormitory. No privacy. No decoration. Just stone, wood, and quiet. And then there is penance. If you are caught in error speaking when forbidden, failing to complete a task, showing too much pride or too much joy, you may be punished. A night spent lying prostrate on the chapel floor, a week of bread and water, silent meals alone, or self-flagellation, a ritual whipping of your own back to remind your body that it is not in charge. And yet, through all this, there is rhythm. The bells ring. You move, you pray, you eat, you labor, you sleep. The days are not yours, but they are certain. They follow the order of centuries, unchanged. You are part of something larger than yourself. A living liturgy, a sacred machine of time and faith. You are no one and, that is, perhaps the point. Still, it is a hard life, a narrow one, cold one. You may not speak of love. You may not look too long at a flower. You may not ask why, but you may pray. You may breathe. If you are lucky, you may forget your former life entirely. And when night comes again, and the final bell tolls, you'll lie once more in silence, waiting for the next morning's darkness to begin. Segment 2. The Strange Journey of Hildegard von Bingen. Imagine yourself within the same stone walls, but this time through a different set of eyes. The year is 1112. You are Hildegard, a young girl of 8, soon to be enclosed in a small Benedictine monastery in the Rhineland. Enclosed not metaphorically. You're quite literally walled in with a small window for food and air, and a grate through which to hear Mass. This is the anchoritic life, a life of contemplation, submission, and quiet revelation. You are sickly. You always have been. Prone to fainting, visions, and overwhelming sensations. To some, this is a sign of divine favor. To others, perhaps an inconvenience. But you endure. As the years pass, you grow not just in body, but in thought. You listen. You read the Latin texts. Slowly, deliberately, you begin to write. First for your own comfort. Then, because the visions return. They are not hallucinations, not to you. They are divine illuminations. You describe them as the living light. At first you hide them. But then, encouraged by a monk named Volmer and the noblewoman Richardis, you begin to write them down. Your writings form Civius, know the ways. It is not a diary, but a strange and luminous fusion of theology, mysticism, and metaphor. You write of cosmic eggs, of divine harmony, of luminous women crowned with stars. You do not ask permission to claim divine instruction. And, miraculously, you are not stopped. You begin to speak more. You preach something nearly unheard of for a woman in your time. You write letters, hundreds of them, to bishops, popes, emperors. You do not flatter. You warn. You advise. You instruct. And you compose. The air within the convent fills with song, not just the Gregorian chants of old, but new compositions. Melodies that seem to swirl upward like incense, written in a style so ethereal that even today, musicologists puzzle over their soaring, otherworldly lines. You call this collection the Symphonia, Harmonia, Celestium, Revelationum, Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations. You also study plants and healing. You write about the natural world, its patterns, its herbs, its balances. You compile Physica and Cassia Curae, early medical texts that blend practical remedies with spiritual insight. You see no divide between the body and the soul, between the soil and the stars. By midlife, you found your own convent on the Rupertsberg. It is yours to lead. You are abbess, though still under the rule of Benedict. You wear the habit, you tend the chapel, but your voice travels far. And yet you never escape the structure entirely. You are still bound to the rhythm of the hours. You still fast, you still kneel, you still bow. You remain at least outwardly obedient. But within obedience, you find agency. Your letters, your visions, your music, and your writings speak not just of God, but of an understanding of the world as something layered, symbolic, and mysterious. You live in a time when most women are silent. You are not. And still you are not rebellious, not in the usual sense. You remain within the lines, but you draw new patterns with them. Toward the end of your life, now well into your 80s, you continue to write. You are tired. The visions come less often. The political landscape shifts. The church worries over orthodoxy. You are warned, even punished briefly over a burial you performed without permission. But your final work, Liber Divinorum Operum, the Book of Divine Works, is completed in your final decade. It is your cosmic vision. It is your last act of service. A harmony between soul, stars, and salvation. And when you die, the bells toll. But not just in mourning, in celebration. Even now, centuries later, your chants are sung, your letters are read. Your visions, once feared, are now studied as art and theology. You are cloistered, but never confined. You were a daughter of silence, but your voice so calm, so clear still echoes. Even after death, monastic voices lived unbound in vellum, written in ink, hidden in libraries behind locked doors and heavy tomes. But many of these voices are now lost to time. What happened to them? Let us now follow the strange fate of monastic manuscripts books that vanished, burned, or were buried, and the mysteries they left behind. Segment 3. The library that burned itself. Lost monastic manuscripts. Imagine standing in a narrow, dust-scented remit's walls lined with thick wooden shelves. The light is dim, perhaps from a slit window or a candle set far from the delicate pages. There is a hush here, not from silence alone, but reverence. This is a medieval monastic library, and it is filled with ghosts. Not the kind that walk or whisper, but the kind that vanish. Words once inked by candlelight, gone. Pages that once turned under trembling fingers, reduced to ash or mold or nothing at all. For centuries, monasteries were the custodians of written knowledge. Monks often, bent-backed, sleepless, eyes strained, copied texts by hand, stroked by careful stroke. The scriptorium, their writing room, was both sacred and exhausting. No printing presses, no machines, only quills, patience, and devotion. These manuscripts held more than prayers. They preserved classical philosophy, medical knowledge, calendars, herbals, chronicles of weather and war. Some were illuminated with gold leaf and vivid pigments, startling bursts of color in a world of gray stone. Others were plain and humble, the daily work of minds obedient to repetition. But where are they now? Most of these books have vanished. Some were lost to fire. Libraries were not fireproof. A single candle left too long, a dry wooden beam, and the past could be consumed in minutes. A monk in the 12th century wrote of such a blaze, watching helplessly as hundreds of works come by hand over decades burned in a single night. Other books were lost through neglect. Pages eaten by insects, bindings unraveled, stored in damp vaults where mold crept like silence over every page. One book, improperly dried after a flood, became so swollen with moisture that it tore itself apart. And then there were deliberate losses. During the Reformation, many monasteries were dissolved. Libraries once sacred were emptied. Some books were taken as trophies, others burned in public squares. Some were used as binding material for more modern texts, their words lost beneath the glue. Yet even earlier monks themselves destroyed manuscripts. Why? Sometimes to reuse the parchment. Vellum was expensive, made from stretched animal skin. When a book was deemed obsolete or unimportant or worse, heretical it was scraped clean, erased, and written over. These are called palimpsests, hidden texts barely visible beneath new words. Modern technology, multispectral imaging, ultraviolet light now reveals glimpses of what was lost. Beneath the surface of a 13th century psalter, a forgotten medical treatise, beneath a page of St. Augustine, an erased Greek tragedy, ghosts returning. Some libraries were not destroyed, but hidden. In Egypt, a bundle of ancient Christian texts was buried in a Jarthanag Hammadi manuscripts. In Afghanistan, Buddhist texts were tucked into caves, only to be rediscovered 1,000 years later. In a remote cave in China, A Taoist monk sealed a trove of manuscripts behind a wall, possibly to protect them from invaders. They were only found again in the early 20th century. But the monastic world, it remains elusive. For every manuscript found, 10 are lost. Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten chest, in the hollow of a ruined abbey, or buried beneath the rubble of history, a monk's careful hand has left a message the world has not yet heard. And what might those pages have said? Perhaps nothing grand. A calendar, a note about weather, a reflection on prayer, forgotten recipe, a line of poetry. But even that is a voice from the darkened echo of someone who once lived, labored, and believed. They wrote for God, for knowledge, for posterity. And we, centuries later, listen, not with shouts, but with quiet attention. Segment 4. Feasting like a bishop. The church's other side now. Imagine stepping away from the austere silence of the monk's cell into the echoing stone halls of a bishop's residence. The fire is lit, casting a low amber glow across long oak tables. Silver dishes reflect the flames. A servant moves quietly through the corridor with fresh bread still warm from the oven. Somewhere softly a choir rehearses in the chapel beyond. This is not a place of suffering, not entirely. This is a world of influence. The church in medieval Europe was not a single uniform experience. For the peasant, the monk, the novice nun, the day was structured by prayer, hunger, and humility. But for the higher clergy bishops, abbots, and cardinals' life often flowed quite differently. It was not without discipline, but it came with power, wealth, and political sway. The bishop of a major cathedral city might control vast estates. These weren't merely houses of worship, they were economic engines. Monasteries brewed ale, raised sheep, milled grain. The abbey could be the largest landowner in an entire region, second only to the king. And that meant tribute, income, authority. Inside the bishop's quarters, the fare was not bread and cold cabbage. It was roasted goose, honeyed fruits, imported spices, wines aged in cask. Monks might fast, but the bishop dined. Feasts were held not only for celebration, but as an expression of station. A bishop's table might groan under the weight of game meats, fish caught from rivers running through church-owned land, cheese from monastery dairies, and pies wrapped in flaky pastry crusts. These meals were often structured with Latin blessings before each course. Between bites, politics might be discussed, alliances formed, abbots appointed. Robes of wool were worn by monks. But bishops might wear fine linen, trimmed with fur, colored with imported dyes. A ring's symbols of office adorned their hands, some set with gems. Ceremonial processions were no less grand. Cloaked in liturgical vestments of gold and crimson, a bishop processing through the cathedral on a high feast day could rival the majesty of any lord. His crozier shepherd's staff, made of gilded metal, was both tool and symbol, guidance, but also dominion. And yet, many bishops walked a careful line. They were not merely nobles, they were men of God. Too much luxury, and they risked scandal. Too much austerity, and they risked losing influence. Some bishops sought balance. Others leaned into privilege. At times, bishops wielded military power. Some rode into battle, clad in armor beneath their robes. In the chaos of the Crusades, the distinction between sword and sermon could blur. But even in peacetime, the bishop's word carried weight. He could excommunicate a noble, he could anoint a king, could bless a marriage, or dissolve it. The church was not merely a spiritual body, it was a pillar of governance. And in their libraries grander than the monks, often filled with volumes from across Christendom, the elite clergy could afford to commission copies of great works. Sometimes even Greek and Arabic texts brought in through Mediterranean trade. These were not necessarily read, but they were owned, preserved, curated. All this while, in the monastery on the hill, the monk lit his candle, opened his worn psalter, and knelt on the cold floor. The contrast was stark, and yet They were part of the same institution. Bishop's velvet and a monk's rope belt each bore the cross. Each lived by the hours. Each in his own way labored for eternity. But one did so with honeyed figs in a feathered bed, while the other slept beneath a stone arch, the wind snaking through cracks in the mortar. Segment 5. The bells never stopped. The monastic hour and the tyranny of time. Imagine you are woken in darkness, not by a rooster, not by sunlight filtering through wooden shutters, but by a bell. It tolls slowly, deep and resonant. It rolls through the cold air, reverberating against stone, stirring you from sleep before the sun has even begun its slow climb toward the sky. This is the beginning of the canonical hours. For medieval monks, time was not measured by clocks or personal rhythms. It was regulated by a sacred, cycle-changing, unyielding schedule rooted not in productivity or leisure, but in devotion. The monastic day was divided into 8 prayer services. These hours were not abstract ideas, but structured physical acts, prayers to be spoken, psalms to be chanted. Every few hours, no matter the season, no matter the fatigue, the bell would sound, matins often before dawn. Lauds as the sun began to rise. Prime, terce, sext, none the middle hours, tied to the day's passage. Vespers in the early evening. And finally, Compline, the night prayer before sleep. The day began in darkness, and it ended there too. There was no sleeping in, no exceptions for weather, no delay for illness, unless grave. When the bell called, the monk came. Slowly, barefoot perhaps, wrapped in a woolen habit, walking the cloister with only the soft shuffle of sandals and the breath of cold on stone. And once assembled, the voices would rise, not with passion, but with rhythm. Chant, plain chant, Gregorian tones flowing like water across stone, not meant to excite, but to steady. This rhythm became life. It structured work copying manuscripts, tending gardens, teaching novices, baking bread. Structured meals, brief, silent, simple. It structured rest, broken, irregular, often insufficient, and over time, it shaped the mind. The monk did not ask what he wanted to do next. He asked what hour it was, not by clock, but by sun, by shadow, by bell. Monasteries developed ingenious ways to measure time. Sundials carved into cloister walls. Water clocks that dripped steadily through the night. Eventually, some even built mechanical clocks slow, massive machines kept alive by weight and wind, designed to ring the bell not for the market square, but for the chapel. This devotion to divine time was not just religious, it was revolutionary. The monastic regulation of ours helped lay the foundation for modern timekeeping. It was monks, not merchants, who first lived by the minute hand. But for the monk himself, his time was not his own. He did not rule it. He served it. Each bell a reminder of surrender, to chant a release of the self into something larger. Imagine the toll of that bell echoing for a lifetime, decade after decade, from youth to old age, until one day you are not among the ones who rise at matins, and the rhythm continues without you. Conclusion. Echoes in the stone, and now, as we leave this winding journey through cloister and cathedral, scriptorium and banquet hall, let us return to silence. Medieval monastic world is one of contrast, of hunger and abundance, of silence and song, of fading ink and burning feasts. It was never easy, rarely fair, and often exhausting. But it was filled with purpose anchored in ritual, repetition, and reverence. Perhaps as you drift off tonight, you might imagine the slow tolling of a monastery bell in the distance, a rhythm marking time in a world far removed from ours. You are not waking before dawn to scrub cold stone. You are not reciting psalms from memory. You are not scraping parchment smooth hour after hour. You are here, warm, rested, and far from the damp cloisters of the past. So close your eyes, let the echoes fade, and sleep gently in the comfort of now. If you'd like, I can now generate the next script in the series from your list of video ideas, you said. Generate me one more segment, ChatGPT said. Certainly. Here is a bonus segment you can use as an alternate or an extra feature designed in the same tone and style as the rest of the video. This could either extend the video to 2.5 hours or be used to replace a future segment if needed. Bonus segment. The bells never stopped. The monastic hour and the tyranny of time. Imagine you are woken in darkness. Not by a rooster, not by sunlight filtering through wooden shutters, but by a bell. It tolls slowly, deep and resonant. It rolls through the cold air, reverberating against stone, stirring you from sleep before the sun has even begun its slow climb toward the sky. This is the beginning of the canonical hours. For medieval monks, time was not measured by clocks or personal rhythms. It was regulated by a sacred psycholanching, unyielding, schedule rooted not in productivity or leisure, but in devotion. The monastic day was divided into 8 prayer services. These hours were not abstract ideas, but structured, physical acts. Prayers to be spoken, psalms to be chanted. Every few hours, no matter the season, no matter the fatigue, the bell would sound. Matins often before dawn. Lauds as the sun began to rise. Prime, terce, sext, none, the middle hours, tied to the day's passage. Vespers in the early evening. And finally, Compline, the night prayer before sleep. The day began in darkness, and it ended there too. There was no sleeping in, no exceptions for weather, no delay for illness, unless grave. When the bell called, the monk came. Slowly, barefoot perhaps, wrapped in a woolen habit, walking the cloister with only the soft shuffle of sandals and the breath of cold on stone. And once assembled, the voices would rise, not with passion, but with rhythm. Chant, plain chant, Gregorian tones flowing like water across stone, not meant to excite but to steady. This rhythm became life. It structured work copying manuscripts, tending gardens, teaching novices, baking bread. Structured meals, brief, silent, simple. It structured rest, broken, irregular, often insufficient, and over time, it shaped the mind. The monk did not ask what he wanted to do next. He asked what hour it was, not by clock, but by sun, by shadow, by bell. Monasteries developed ingenious ways to measure time. Sundials carved into cloister walls. Water clocks that dripped steadily through the night. Eventually, some even built mechanical clocks slow, massive machines kept alive by weight and wind, designed to ring the bell not for the market square, but for the chapel. This devotion to divine time was not just religious, it was revolutionary. The monastic regulation of ours helped lay the foundation for modern timekeeping. It was monks, not merchants, who first lived by the minute hand. But for the monk himself, his time was not his own. He did not rule it. He served it. Each bell a reminder of surrender. Each chant a release of the self into something larger. Imagine the toll of that bell echoing for a lifetime. Decade after decade, from youth to old age, till one day, you are not among the ones who rise at matins, and the rhythm continues without you. Optional transition, or close. The bells have long since quieted in most of those abbeys. The scripts faded, the voices stilled. But the rhythm they lived by, that quiet, relentless devotion, still echoes softly through time. And perhaps, as you listen tonight, you hear it too. In the silence between breaths, in the hush before sleep, the sound of a bell you don't remember hearing, but somehow always knew.